Yeah, I can hear you. Thank you. You are able to hear me as well? Okay, thank you.
Hello, everyone. I hope you've all had some interesting conversations from going table to table. It definitely sounds like there's been some really productive chat, and I've definitely seen some really good findings coming back. So I think what we're going to do now is go through the tables and volunteers to come up to just give an overview of your thoughts on the questions posed. So we're going to start here, going through the tables, and then go over to Malawi to see that sort of global south point of view as well. Just checking they're ready. I think they are. So can I ask maybe the table at the back left to bring up a volunteer to the microphone there and just give us an overview of what you thought on these questions. Just to flag those last two for my... The microphone just on there.
So we're doing one person that's answering each question. So
you've gone for one person per question?
Yeah, so we're doing one person per
question. Okay, cool.
If that's okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm answering the first question, which was, what was the first question again? What does loss and damage look like in your community? Yeah, what does addressing loss and damage mean to you? Yeah, so first question. So we kind of agreed that in Scotland, loss and damage isn't really happening on the same scale as it is in the global south, so Scotland shouldn't really be a priority for loss and damage funding. But where loss and damage does happen, like with floods or like with storms and stuff, there are kind of systems in place in Scotland that deal with this already. So there's like insurance and like council help and like government help for these things that are not like specifically related to loss and damage. So like that kind of thing happens already, so that's why Scotland shouldn't really be a priority for this. But however, there are definitely some losses and damage that is happening in Scotland, like especially on island communities. There's a lot of like on the Outer Hebrides, there's a lot of like traditional Gaelic culture and crafting and like traditional building and stuff that is being affected by climate change. And if this did have like a loss and damage label attached to it, it would have more of like an international significance. So we think it needs like recognition, but it doesn't maybe specifically need funding within Scotland, because I think that funding would be better used elsewhere. So yeah, that's our question one.
Brilliant, thank you very much.
So my one was, or what I'm reporting is what actions should COP parties take to support addressing loss and damage. And what we were saying is firstly to stop causing the damage. So the UK government is still, even though they're making these great pledges and everything, they're still funding coal in Cumbria, they're still spending billions of public money on subsidising and funding fossil fuel industries, and it's really frustrating. And although that's the UK government, we were saying the Scottish government could take a stronger stance. Yeah. So like say no to Cambo, like really say, really be there for the climate. And then so beyond that, first of all, stop doing that, and then also kind of acknowledge our responsibility in the global north of emissions and what's been caused. So then that more funding can go into these disasters. So firstly, more money, acknowledgement, kind of also we were thinking about kind of reparations, etc. Since there's a history of, there's a history of causing more emissions and also colonization and all this kind of stuff. Importantly, we wanted no strings to be attached, so it should be, it shouldn't be a loan, for example. It should be just giving, and make it a permanent agenda, and really listen to what's needed. So similarly to what Mary was saying, is to make sure that the most vulnerable people are also getting the money, etc., etc.
Yeah, really good points, and definitely points I've heard elsewhere. It sounds like there's a lot, basically, that COP26 needs to be doing on loss and damage.
Hi, I had the opportunity to write the answers for the third question. Where are these opportunities for your country to build support in addressing? We had some fantastic answers, and luckily they were all pointing in the same direction on our table. So the first one is investments in research, training, and skill development for people directly affected by climate change. And then commitment to financial support, especially for countries and communities from the global south. And then Scotland using their soft power at COP26 to drive up political action on loss and damage, to take a stronger stance on climate impact-based events and situations like Cambo or the pension funds. And then maybe the ministers or the MSPs can keep bringing up climate justice in their speeches so that people remember that it is actually happening right now in real time. It is affecting people, it is impacting people somewhere else, maybe not here. So.
Brilliant. Yeah, and again, the points that are really valid and that we've heard coming up quite a lot is just there is a role that Scotland can play here, and we just need to sort of do it now. We've sort of made that soft power movement, first actor, first mover, but now it's sort of put it into action, walk the walk. Perfect, thank you.
So just to address question number 4, we agreed that a high level of communication between both countries is key to collaboration. So high level of communication at all areas of society, so from school level, further at higher education, and then in the workplace as well, with more events like this, because if we don't learn about each other's countries, then we can't collaborate effectively. Yeah. So we agreed on that, maybe create a space for communicating through things like film, social media, and podcasts, and using them to learn more about each other and about the impact of climate change as well. And also collaboration in research. So just sort of understanding the data, understanding the science on the impact of loss and damage because of climate change, and how much concrete things like how much is loss costing Malawi and things like that. And also we were talking about continuing the funding, continuing with money and reviewing that money to see if it's enough. Sometimes it's quite difficult to grasp the amount of money needed for loss and damage and how to help these things. So keep a close eye on that, and use those links, those communication links, to make sure that support is provided in the best way possible.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, is that you commit those figures, or you make some sort of commitment, but the pace of climate change and what's locked in is so rapid that it becomes out of date. But we wouldn't know that sitting here in Scotland if we're not having that collaboration and communication. So yeah, I think that's a really good point, and this is stuff that we can actually take action on as Scottish Government. So thank you very much. Maybe over to the table on the right there.
Okay. Hello, everyone. So, yeah, first question was, what does addressing loss and damage mean to you and your community? So, just for some context, I'm from Fiji, so quite a very different meaning, I would say. So for us in Fiji, it means a lot of heartache and hardship. Just for some context, we experienced one of the strongest tropical cyclones in the southern hemisphere. We lost a third of our GDP in 36 hours. So communities, individuals lost sources of their livelihoods since most of us are dependent on our agriculture and the fishing industry. Houses were blown down, schools were blown down, and even till today, we're still recovering from that. And yes, so that's just from Fiji. And another thing it also means for us is having resilient housing and infrastructure so that we can not face this issue of rebuilding every single time we have tropical cyclones and flooding and so forth. Coastal communities are impacted. We have displaced communities because of tropical cyclones and flooding. Last year we had 2 tropical cyclones at a very high intensity, and we're expecting 3 to 4 tropical cyclones during this tropical season. So yes, for us, that is what it means.
You mentioned in Scotland, maybe. Yeah, there was one interesting example as well, many interesting examples around Scotland, around extreme events, so flooding, landslides and things. And an example that came from Ryan in Paisley was that roadworks were being done at the time of flooding, which meant that the town was completely isolated. So examples like that we're seeing more of recently. Is there anything else on that? We're good to move on? Move on to question 2. So this was on the actions for COP parties, and something that came out of this was that we really want it to be treated as an emergency, so something that needs to be done now. We had a feeling that there's reluctancy and some delay in the negotiations and the discussions around this. So yeah, really focusing on the fact that this is an emergency and needs a short-term finance target, so not something that's delayed for 2-3 years, but something that's now and comes out of this COP. And we also talked about the differences between loans and grants, which I think was mentioned as well, and the fact that insurance has come up in some of the discussions, and that this doesn't seem feasible. There's very high interest rates, so the idea that insurance and things like loans aren't really the way forward, but more around grants. Okay, I think that's us. Is there anything else anyone else wanted to? It's okay? Okay. And then we did question 3 and 4 together, so around building support and collaboration. And something that came up was really around the idea of knowledge sharing in nations and across nations and countries as well. And something else that was mentioned around research and the fact that we need sort of science models and expert advice, but along with communities, so that these implementations and solutions are really led by members of the community who are impacted, and how that sort of relationship can work between the research community and communities themselves who are impacted. We also talked about sometimes there can be maladaptation, so solutions put in place for adaptation or for mitigation that can end up having negative or unforeseen circumstances. So the idea of more collaboration to try and reduce that happening. And something else we mentioned was around mental health support. So I think a lot of it, and especially the economic costs, come into infrastructure and loss to sort of buildings and things like that, and less so on the mental health support. And something, I think the first words that we wrote down were hardship and heartache. So something around that, how we can sort of help develop that between nations and communities as well. Was there anything else you wanted to add? No, we're good? We're good? Yeah, I think that's us.
Thank you very much. Maybe over to this table here.
So yeah, just on question 1, a lot of the things that we had discussed have already been brought up, but in particular, sort of in Scotland in particular, recognising sort of local, regional, national and international inequalities, how loss and damage is affecting, communities in Scotland. I think often in Scotland people try and distance, flooding and things away from, being caused by climate change. So making sure that there is we're encouraging a link between the two, sort of creating that proximity to the problem in order for people to recognise, the vast scale that's affecting other communities around the world, in particular frontline communities. And a good point that Dorothy made about addressing loss and damage is making sure it's a standalone agenda, that it has its own sort of standalone financial commitment, rather than being sort of lumped into a lot of sort of development financial commitments that people have made. It sort of makes it unaccountable within sort of climate change finances. So yeah, making sure it's a standalone agenda. For question 2, what action should COP parties take to support L&D? Again, a lot of the points we discussed have already come up, but in particular sort of holding high emitting countries to account, and how that happens is something that we still, obviously it's very difficult to do, but making sure that high emitting countries are being held to account, and that also we're addressing the inequity of carbon consumption and carbon recording, and making sure that countries are taking responsibility for their own carbon usage, whether it happens at home or abroad. That's difficult to record, of course, but finding a way to do so. Yeah.
So for the third question, where are the opportunities for your country to build support in addressing loss and damage? Well, we feel like some of these opportunities are the Climate Justice Fund that we have, and also the partnerships that we already have. We can build on that. We can use these partnerships to share more knowledge and information, and the resources that we have, we can be sharing it with each other. And also the fact that £1 million was contributed for this, but it's not enough. So yeah, of course we do need more funds, but using this fund that we already have, we can we can invest a little bit in it to get something in return. So to be more of an investment, come up with more green entrepreneurship in areas such as that. The other opportunities are the campaigns, raising more awareness. We can continue raising more awareness and use these type of different platforms that we already have in order to increase the awareness. So, as education as well, we can use education, in our school curriculums. We can emphasize, in my country, we don't really have climate change as a subject. So I feel like using the education system to promote this type of information and awareness is it would be very helpful. So for the last one, it's how can Scotland and Malawi collaborate in addressing loss and damage? Okay, it's the same as the third one. We can use this partnership and use the resources that we have to share this type of knowledge. And also technology is very important, accessibility to the internet. I feel like it's very important for us. Okay, we discussed that it's really important that we take the injustices that are happening at home and we bring it out there, because so many things are happening at home, and it's only when you come here you actually understand that, okay, this is what's happening. But in my country, so we don't have access to internet. Not a lot of people, it's only people that are kind of, okay, would say privileged, and people in the rural area don't have access to internet. So how are we going to get information from them to the outside world, and how are we going to get information from the outside world to them? So we could use technology, but because we don't really have technology, then maybe for now we could have a focal point in a specific community, and that focal point will be getting information from their communities and what's happening in their communities and taking it to the outside world and vice versa. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you both very much. And yeah, some really good points there on knowledge, and yeah, backing that up as well with capacity building to actually help the knowledge sort of make that real difference. Just going to go over to this table at the front.
So for the first question, a lot of what we've talked about has come up already, but I'll try and focus on what hasn't. So for the first question, what does addressing loss and damage mean? We talked about it as climate reparations, as global north, countries accepting responsibility for the ills of the past. and like honouring the rights of future generations, the right of future generations' right to a safe climate. So yeah, that was kind of what we focused on, and like centering loss and damage when we talk about climate justice, because we were saying that climate justice is quite well understood now, but loss and damage still feels like quite a technical term to people who aren't familiar with it. So how can we like really put it in the middle of climate justice? And then for the second one, we talked about for like what can COP parties do. Well, we were saying that like they can make real commitments. So obviously Scotland's not a COP party, but like COP parties can make real commitments and with real financing. They can operationalise the Santiago Agreement, which was agreed in COP25, but hasn't been operationalised and focuses on loss and damage. They can finalise a definition for loss and damage without that meaning that then they delay on it. But I think we were saying an agreed definition could be quite a useful mechanism. Like take an intersectional lens that looks at vulnerability in different ways and understands and looks across at how loss and damage is affecting different communities in different ways. And we also mentioned making loss and damage finance accessible. So at the point where it's then being given, it needs to be done in a way that centers the people. So in question 3, we also talked about that. So for question 3, which is on what are the opportunities, we were saying that there are kind of different opportunities for global South countries versus global North countries. There can still be an international approach, but there are different. There may be different approaches depending on the positioning. So one thing that we were saying global South countries can do is they can provide data on the realities of loss and damage, so that this data can then be used for understanding it a bit better, and center local voices and experts. So when financing appears, making sure that it's done in a way that again centers the people and uses local experts rather than using kind of Western experts. We talked a bit about how this. I think everyone's brought up grants, not loans. I don't want to say it the wrong way around, and how loss and damage needs to not become a mechanism for kind of Western countries growing more influence in certain places and neocolonialism. So one way of combating that is making sure that local people are centered and local experts and local knowledge is key to where the finance goes. And then one other thing we talked about is that global South countries can establish a financing mechanism that works for the people. So that was what we did for question 3, and then for question 4, we were kind of touching on the same things again. So Malawi can share data, Scotland can try and listen and understand what's happening in Malawi, and again, so someone was saying nothing about us without us. So making sure that there is really an emphasis on Malawian voices. Cool.
Thank you very much. That's really cool. And the reassuring thing is across all the tables, there's some reoccurring themes, which is really nice to hear. I think it helps direct the way forward. And yeah, hearing a lot there about fair finance, knowledge sharing, capacity building, and that's sort of the key of communicating and collaborating. And these are all things that we, the Scottish Government, can play a role in. So that's the feedback from this room. It'd be really good to go over to Malawi and hear the feedback from those guys. Hendrix, over to you.
Thank you, Thomas. In here, we have 5 groups, 1 up to group number 5. So I'm calling a presenter for group 1. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For group 1, in specific question of what does addressing loss and damage mean to us, very much. For group 1, in relation to the first question of what does addressing loss and damage mean to us, we say loss and damage mean there is food security, through sound agricultural methods. Loss and damage mean there is access to clean water. Loss and damage mean socio-economic needs are met. As well as loss and damage mean technological advancements specifically aimed at curbing loss and damage, as well as early warning systems are also met. Coming to the second question on what action should COP parties take in addressing loss and damage, there is need for direct funding to non-governmental organizations that are specifically championing loss and damage, as well as we also need undivided attention to the youth in terms of investments aimed at championing innovation and digital advancements aimed at curbing loss and damage. We're also talking about there is need for peer review at global level where countries should meet and make a contribution of how they're addressing loss and damage in their countries. We thought it was that the peer review is really important at a global level. And at the same time, there is need for an innovation hub whereby use with innovative ideas specifically for loss and damage are given a platform to contribute to innovation, so incubation, which is the goal orientation of that is to sustain technological development and this practicality in different communities in the context of Malawi. The other aspect is about capacity building, to which at national level we can talk about ministerial approaches in relation to the same. For example, in Malawi, specifically in education, we can talk about curriculum review or curriculum change, specifically taking deliberate actions in the country, specifically in the education sector, to influence on the local level. We can talk about farmers and civil society to continue bringing awareness as far as loss and damage is concerned. On question number 3, where these opportunities for our country are being addressed or you support, we talked about national determined contribution as one of the platforms where we feel issues of loss and damage could be championed. And at the same time, we talked about the carbon levy. Carbon levy as also another arena to which the loss and damage will also be. On how can Scotland and Malawi collaborate in addressing loss and damage, we feel there is need for more deliberate initiatives to already existing ones, which is massive, as well as Kiev. These initiatives will also be aimed at influencing more initiatives or more activities to loss and damage. So we feel if they can be that increased support through creation of more initiatives, that will also help in loss and damage. At the same time, we also talked about technological advancement, for example, through the meteorological services. Currently, as you all know, in Malawi, for the sake of art and through the social service. But we feel with partnership between Malawi and Scotland that also influence research, sharing of information as regards to the same to improve information sharing as well as work delivery, as much as loss and damage is concerned. Coming to the on today's corporation, on what has to be done by the corporations to make the corporations special loss and damage. We feel, in as much as we're preaching about practicality in relation to the same, the national determined contribution should be as practical as possible and provide detailed examples specifically for loss and damage. And in a situation where a country fails to show its national contribution, at least the court should be able to defend. So that at the end of the day, the goal is not to not give resources to a particular country. The goal is to make sure each and every country benefits from the resources, from the tapped-in resources that are meant to help everyone. So through the national determined contributions, we feel, one, the countries should show the practical aspect in the national determinant, which they should be at least be given another chance to explain back whatever they have contributed to the national determinant contribution to at least practical examples. For example, in the context of Malawi, we can talk about regeneration, dry planting, as well as agroecological techniques. On the other question, on the additional questions, whether public communication awareness or loss, where there is enough knowledge in public communication or awareness, we feel more can be done in relation to the same, just as much as we do with weather forecast. We feel whether it's media, TV stations, radios, should also draw much focus on sharing information to do with loss and damage, as well as maybe sharing the information with the Meteorological Service Department, so that members of the nation at large will also be updated on loss and damage. More can be done in relation to that. On who should pay for loss and damage, we feel the better approach to this would be farmers' insurance, whereby there is the insurance aspect for farmers to be able to insure their crops or projects. End of the day, if any disaster has occurred, if any loss or damage has occurred, the insurance company should be responsible paying for the loss. And so in the context of Malawi, we feel it's a responsibility of everyone, of the non-government organization and the government at large, to make sure this, in terms of making sure farmers in Malawi have got insurance for their crops, whatever agricultural related products they have, so that at the end of the day, get loss and damage.
Thank you very much for that comprehensive feedback. That was really useful. And yeah, the mention there of having loss and damage in the nationally determined contributions is a really good practical step forward. And yeah, I definitely got aspects of collaboration and communication coming through from that. So I can, yeah, that's really good. And obviously, in Malawi, they've done the same as we've done here, so there'll be sort of written contributions that we'll be able to sort of write up. I'm just thinking, that's time. So in terms of next steps, and thank you very much for that, I'm sure everyone's wondering what happens next. So, you know, it doesn't end today. So as mentioned, what we'll be doing is taking all of these findings and the findings there in Lilongwe to put together a synthesized outcome paper on what happened today on Loss and Damage Day, and that will be combined with wider engagement that we're undertaking by Scottish Government. And this will be then shared with attendees here and in Malawi. And I think that's us for now. Oh. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. That's not... yeah, apologies about that. But yeah, in terms of timing, I think that's the end of the event, so we're going to have to call it there. But we will be picking up the outcomes with Malawi after this event. So thank you all for your time today. It's greatly appreciated. And hopefully you found it useful as well. Cheers. Thank you very much.